Brian Flores' defense is playing lights out, but it's not going to keep up if they don't address this one fatal flaw that's been killing them lately. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, criminal masterminds? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. If you're new here, hello, my name is Luke Braun. Nice to meet you. You can find the show anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, including SiriusXM, where you can also listen to live broadcasts of all the games, like radio broadcasts. You can also find the show on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And now actually Amazon Fire contains the entire Locked On network, which is pretty cool. Thank you so much to those of you who do tune in to Locked On Vikings every single day. My hashtag every day. I love hearing from you. I love seeing all your Spotify raps. Keep sending them to me. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So it's nice to be on the bye week because we can chill out a little bit. We can take a slower pace and really dive into some of the patterns we've been seeing in the bigger picture with the Vikings. And I want to do the defense today. So we're not going to do the classic bold predictions and the PrizePicks and all that stuff because the Vikings don't play a game. But we'll get back to that next week. Worry ye not, we will get weird. But today, we're coming off of this unbelievably great wasted defensive performance where the Bears didn't score a touchdown, yet the Vikings lose the game. Very frustrating. Lots of stuff going wrong on offense. I've complained about it for 2 days straight. If you'd like to hear that, listen to yesterday's show or the day before it, or honestly anything from this week. But I've sort of neglected the defense, and there's a couple things that I want to talk about that are gonna be bigger problems than they have been for as long as things are run the same. And I before I get into it, a quick caveat: this is not like a Brian Flores is wrong take or a hit piece or anything like that. This is not me saying that anybody's necessarily doing a bad job, but there is a flaw that everybody sees, and they would do well to correct it. The bye week would be a pretty good time to take a look at that kind of thing. That's, I guess, where I'm at. And if they correct it and the defense, goes to another level, then I get to take my victory lap. And if they don't, and it gets a lot worse, I get to take my victory lap, right? That's the take. In particular, the Vikings have an issue in their coverages on the back end when they blitz. When the Vikings send 6, in particular 6, they have 5 men in coverage on the back end, right? And a lot of times that is there's simulated pressure involved in that too. So you have guys lined up on the line of scrimmage, which makes it really hard to give them man coverage responsibilities. If they have to, line up, make it look like they're blitzing, then go chase somebody in a route, that's going to be open all day long. You're never going to be able to cover that, right? So you need to have, as much as I love the off-man coverage looks that the Vikings do employ in their cover zero, those have been fantastic and they're awesome. But if you want to be able to use simulated pressure to manipulate protections in the way that Brian Flores is so good at and has been so wildly successful at, then you have to have zone something that you can do on the back end so that when the coverage rules dictate that Jonathan Bullard backs off into coverage, that he has a job that he can execute. This is the operative issue. How do you do that without doing something like what Ed Donatel got caught doing all the time last year, which was ask DJ Wanham to cover the flat. And then they just get killed in the flat when they blitzed that way. And it wasn't even a blitz. They would do 4-man rush and DJ Wanham would be in the flat. So anytime they were in base, you could just kind of figure out which edge rusher was dropping and throw it out that way. It was there every single time. You don't want to be caught in that world, right? So the way the Vikings play it is to essentially say, we just kind of give you the flat. If you want to throw to the flat, you just kind of have it. You can just do it. And hopefully to, 3-step drop and deliver that ball is difficult enough for you to execute where you can't do it. And against some teams, it worked. It worked against Love. It worked against Bryce Young. It worked against some of the offenses that were really struggling when the Vikings played them. But in the last few weeks, it has not at all. In particular, Broncos and Bears games killed the Vikings, taking advantage of that in 2-minute drill kind of stuff, and got some of their best production doing that. This, though, is not a phenomenon that has been happening in the final drives of those last 2 games. This is not the way that it's been going because the Vikings haven't been blitzing on those. Instead, they are playing vanilla coverages on the back end. But I do think that, and those vanilla coverages have been killed, by the way. Like that pass to DJ Moore, Vikings were just in straight up like zone quarters, like just purely vanilla quarters, which is pretty crappy to have to be in that play call in such a pivotal moment and kind of not really be able to have any tricky tricks going on, just kind of hoping everybody can pass their zones off properly. And then, you make one mistake and it's a 30-yard catch and you lose the game. But part of the reason that they're not blitzing is because this issue on the back end where they say we're just going to give up the flats still exists. And the way the Vikings play coverage on the back end, when they have 5 men in coverage available to them and they're not just going man up across the board. So they're going to send 6. They want to make it confusing which 6. And we need to have 5 guys on the back end, and one of those guys might be like a D tackle. They play 3 deep, 2 under. So you have cover 3, basically. You have a middle third zones for like the 2 corners and a safety, and then 2 under, where whoever is dropping out of that pressure, whether it's Metellus or a linebacker or even a defensive lineman, are going to play hook zones underneath to the middle. They basically both park themselves on the hashes and follow the quarterback's eyes. Those players are never in a million years going to get out to the flat against like an out route. They'll chase it, but they're never, ever going to make that play. And the cornerback is also never going to make that play when he's playing a deep third responsibility. It's an open spot on the field. Look, you got 5 guys in coverage. There's going to be something open. They have chosen to make it the flats. So, can we improve upon this? Because if we can get to something that feels a little bit sounder, even maybe at the expense of some of the tricky tricks and pressure, we might be able to sort of unlock a comfort level on the back end that lets us blitz more at the end of games. And that's where I'm trying to get here. Is how do you blitz more at the end of games? How do you get it so you don't have to rely on rush 4 vanilla coverage at the end of a game when, the timeline is compressed and the field is warped because it's, 2-minute and things and everybody's world is different in 2-minute. So a few things to try. One is forget the sim pressures, just send a bunch of dudes and go off man coverage. Don't hate that idea. Doesn't take a lot to explain, fairly simple, and therein lies its strengths. Everybody man covers, and then you just kind of have to say, all right, Mekhi Blackmon, if you get beat next week by Devontae Adams, then so be it. Then we lost the game. All right, that's one option. I don't know if I love it, right? And, those corners don't have to cover forever because we are sending 6. Ideally, you're getting pressure. But when you do send 6, it's fairly easy for an offense to leave 6 in protection. You bring the back into protection. You've got your 5 offensive linemen. And then it's just a matter of cat and mouse. Can we get a hat on a hat here? And everybody win their matchups. That is a challenge for the offense to do consistently. But when it comes down to, okay, we need to get a stop on these next 3 plays, in the short term, that's not providing quite enough entropy, I guess. So how do we do that? So let me, I guess, put forth some suggestions in coverage, or at least some ideas, and we can talk them out and see the pros and cons and see if we like any of these ideas. And I also want to talk a little bit about defending the option and how the Vikings did against that as well. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Still running that promo that they've been running for a while now, but get in while the getting's good. You can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. So you can go get some scrub NBA team, take a money line against them for just $5 at minus 2,000, and you get $150 back in bonus bets, assuming you win that. That's a minus 2,000 bet. You can get that at 30-1 odds. All you got to do is go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up at that link. If you have not already signed up for FanDuel, if you're a new customer, you can get that $150 in bonus bets. They got spreads, player props, over-unders, all kinds of great stuff. The app is safe and super secure, easy to use, and they pay out instantly when you win. So head on over to America's #1 sportsbook. That is FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. After this show, go check out the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 feed or the Locked On Minnesota Sports 24/7 feed, which if you're watching on YouTube, you don't even have to hit a button. Just wait for this thing to end. It'll take you right there. It's a 24/7 feed of all Locked On shows discussing all kinds of sports. If you're into the national angle, if you just want to hear about Minnesota sports, Wolves, Wild, Vikings, of course, the roundtables they do on Locked On Minnesota Sports, all of that stuff, you can find that 24/7 live feed on the Locked On Minnesota Sports YouTube channel. Let's see if we can't solve the problem, right? All right, so we've diagnosed that there's this issue where the flats are always open. And in a 2-minute drill, you can't really do sim pressures and fancy stuff that require you to call a coverage where the flats are open in the exact same way every single time, right? We can't live like that because they'll just kill you with quick outs down the field. They'll get out of bounds every time. You'll never win a single 2-minute drill doing that. So that's why they don't call it, right? So how can we get to a point where we can call it? So for me, I'm looking at coverages and saying, how can we do this differently? Yeah, you can man cover, but what if we don't trust that? And there's a few options, right? There's 2 deep 4 under, which is, 2 half safeties like cover 2, but then instead of your classic cover 2 with 5 underneath zones, you have 4 underneath zones that play out like the bottom half of cover 3 plays out. And essentially you seed a lot of the middle of the field that way, right? Because you don't have a middle deep defender and you don't have a middle shallow defender. But in 2 minutes, that might be okay. Because if they're going to throw at the middle of the field and use all their time, depends on how much time they have left. But at a certain point, that becomes a viable option. That's one thing that you can do. The problem there as well is that 6 people in coverage. So we've taken someone out of the pressure and the 5-man pressures just aren't going to be as spicy. So we want to keep those spicy 6-man pressures. The idea of 2 deep, 3 under is very intriguing to me. Again, you've only got 5 guys and you just 2 half zones. Those guys play cover 2. And then underneath, you do have 2 people playing a little bit more in the flat. And they do have to be faster people that are probably coming off the edge. You're not going to have somebody, you're not going to have Anthony Barr mug the A gap and then go into the flat like he used to back in the good old days, right? That when he could do that, it solved this problem, right? We don't have that guy. Maybe we have Ivan Pace. Maybe Pace can be that guy. But if that's Bullard, like that can't be the guy. But you do give that D tackle a nice, easy middle hook zone to get to. So if it is Harrison Phillips and you have the center that turns toward Harrison Phillips, and because they know that our blitz rules mean that whoever the center turns toward drops into coverage, and now we got Harrison Phillips in coverage, all he's doing is backing up 5 yards deep, or I think it's like 7 yards deep, and over where the ball was. And then you watch the QB's eyes. That's all he's got to do. He can do that. And you solve your flat problem. The downside here is there's a lot of holes in the deep part of the field when you just have 2 safeties. That's been a problem since like the 80s. So that's going to get us got sometimes. You have this nice, easy thing up the middle of the seam, right? All you got to do is layer it over like a defensive tackle who's the underneath defender in the middle. Or you, of course, have the corners, which it's not even like the turkey hole thing that you might hear about against true cover 2, where you have a corner playing like kind of maybe deep and squeezing that off and you have to make a really good throw. This is maybe someone coming out of the pressure who would then have to chase that down. So that corner route is there forever, but it's a little slower than the flat. Like I said before, when you are only dedicating 5 people to coverage, there are going to be holes somewhere. And defensive philosophy in general. Like, there are always going to be deficiencies somewhere in your defensive scheme. There just aren't enough players to solve everything on every play. You have to eventually decide, this is what we're okay with giving up. And for me, I will give up that corner route faster than I will give up the 9-yard out that's pitch and catch, right? Because that at least would take a 5-step drop instead of a 3-step drop and give the pressure that much more time to get home. The Vikings got killed on that in particular, and I think this is what sort of started this cascade of issues in 2-minute drills, is they got killed by the Chargers on that. The Chargers in particular really got them. And to be honest, I think enough teams have marched down the field on them in 2-minute drills when they're doing their blitzes that, like the Chiefs did it too, that they just moved away from it entirely. So I think the bye can be a good opportunity to revisit that idea and say, hey, if we do go 3 deep, 2 under, or if we want to go, 2 deep, 3 under, what are the pros and cons of that? Yeah, we might give up bigger chunk plays, and that corner route's a really bad thing to give. It's like the worst possible thing to give up because it's a bigger chunk and it still gets out of bounds. But you might not get that with the same frequency because that's a harder throw. That's a harder thing to time. It's harder to get that throw off without the sack happening. And hey, shoot, our safeties are playing out of their skulls right now. Maybe Cam Bynum just makes the play, right? I like the idea of putting more into his hands rather than putting things into the hands of, like, can Ivan Pace or Josh Metellus go from the hash to the numbers and like teleport out there and tackle a running back that's leaking out of the protection. That has not worked. And that's just too much to ask of. It's just too much ground to cover. So I'd be down to try something that is a little bit harder to punish. Those punishes will be there, but they'll be harder to execute consistently. You get more incomplete passes, right? There's also the run game. And while the run defense has been pretty gosh darn good in the last few weeks, there is one issue that kind of cropped up in the Bears game that I will explain to you, but also understand that they don't really have another like running quarterback on the schedule. They got like Jordan Love, but he's not like a read option run quarterback. He'll scramble a little bit, but he's not like a running quarterback like Fields is. So it might be a moot point by now, but it's still interesting enough. And we can learn a little bit about run fits and how the Vikings did not really #defend the option. Thank you to the sponsor of today's episode, which is Gametime. Gametime is a place where you can buy last-minute tickets on flash sales, and they won't be pumped up to heck like they usually will be for tickets to any event. Football games in particular, sure, yes, but also basketball games, hockey games, concerts, theater, all of that stuff. Just go to the Gametime app or gametime.co, figure out what event it is, and it's, if you've got a whim that you want to go, hey, let's go to a game this weekend, and they will scour the internet for all kinds of things for every kind of event in your area. You get views from all the seats. You can just look at a picture, make sure you don't have like an obstructed view or anything like that. And they have the game time guarantee, which means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, then Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. You can buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps of your finger on the Game Time app. Just download that app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. On Friday's Locked On Vikings episode, I went into a lot of detail about how to defend the option. In summary, you have to have an extra person who is responsible for the quarterback that is either coming from the outside or is somehow like stunting. And you basically have to organize your run fits in terms of you take the dive or you take the running back and you take the quarterback. And then if there's triple option, you get into like the weird college stuff that happens. You need the pitch, the quarterback, and the dive. So you kind of need 3 people. And ideally, you need 2 people assigned to each person, right? Which can get a little bit dicey when it comes to also fitting each of those people in the gap. So it can get a little bit more complicated, which is exactly why offenses love to do it, right? Lots of opportunities to screw up. I went into a ton more detail on Friday, so if you're interested, do go check that out. But the way the Vikings approached this was on the backside of run plays, which you can usually tell the backside of the run is more often than not always, but more often than not, going to be the side the running back lines up on in shotgun. Just think about that, right? Like you have the quarterback standing there, running back is on one side. He's almost always going to cross the quarterback, get the ball, and run the play to the other side of where he aligned. So on the side where the running back was, the Vikings lined up an extra person. It was basically always Josh Metellus in quarterback run situations, like whenever the Bears called it, at least. And he was the guy that was responsible for the quarterback. And whether it was a straight zone handoff and then, Justin Fields boots out, pretends he has the ball, Metellus will go chase him, and he's not really part of the run play anymore until he reads the play and squeezes down the space, which he did a really nice job of. That's the job that he has to do. I talked about it in Danielle Hunter's perspective, but essentially they had Hunter and Metellus over there because the Bears had all kinds of plans for blocking that backside edge in situations where they wanted to run Justin Fields. So you need another guy to replace him, right? He's, okay, you're going to bring a tight end into the equation. Well, I'm going to bring my own guy to the party. And now, we've retained the numbers advantage that we have. So they had an extra guy all the time on the backside of the run. This had a few effects. For one, Justin Fields did not rush as often as he did against the Lions. It discouraged that, right? You had somebody waiting every time for Justin Fields, just meant however many zone reads they tried to call, a lot of them were Gibbs and just turned into Khalil Herbert runs right up into Harrison Phillips. It's exactly what we wanted. That's great. We'll take that all day. But it also had the effect of sort of underloading the front side of the play, and it created this really interesting game of cat and mouse. And for as much guff as I've given Luke Getsy this year, and I think everybody has, and with good reason, I think they did a great job of designing their QB run game, where they had Danielle Hunter accounted for at all times, right? Double teamed a lot on these. And as the backside edge trying to squeeze space, if you get double teamed, your job is already really hard if you aren't blocked at all. But if you get blocked, or if you are double team blocked, which, the Bears would just say, screw it, we're putting two tight ends on you. And you have to, discourage the quarterback run and squeeze a little bit of space and do all this stuff. And you're fighting contact the whole time. It either forced a linebacker to come in from depth, or a corner to, win a block against a tight end or something like that. They did a really good job of forcing some of those QB runs to happen by changing who the read was. Once it's not Danielle Hunter, there were a couple of times where it was Jonathan Bullard, and he became the guy that had to squeeze down the space. And while he did a decent job of parking himself, he squeezed it so far inside that it was no longer a give read, and now you had Justin Fields in space. And if you remember a few of the plays in that Monday night game where Justin Fields seemed to keep the ball, run horizontally, and the edge was wide open, that's what was happening there, where essentially they asked Jonathan Bullard to be Danielle Hunter, and as good of a season as he's had, and I think he's had a pretty underrated season, he ain't Danielle. So he was going to get to the edge. And if it was DJ Wanham on that side, well, you can forget all about it. And, Wanham had a couple interesting moments, but he also had some moments where he was a little bit slow to squeeze down that space. He would come up field and say, look, I got you quarterback. You got to give the ball away. You are not going to keep this zone read. The running back takes it away from that whole contraption and cuts it back quickly enough where DJ Wanham wasn't able to close down that space. And what could have been a 2-yard gain turned into a 6-yard gain. One step of a difference is all it takes, where you're getting tackled on your hip or you're getting tackled by your back and falling forward for 4 more yards, right? So there are some moments where I just go, yeah, that play, Wanham just didn't play it fast enough. Or, that play required Jonathan Bullard to race Justin Fields out to the flat. He's just not that kind of athlete. But from a schematic perspective, I think the Vikings did get out-schemed a little bit. While it's a good idea to put 2 guys on the edges, once they started blocking those guys up and actually committing resources to the backside of their run plays, I think that sort of opened up an opportunity of a fairly soft front where they're running weak side or they're running, with guys pulling away from the front side of their run plays because of the read stuff that they're doing. And that represented an opportunity, I think, to get aggressive on the front side, either with like a run blitz or something like that, or just changing the way that you're telling players to approach their run fit instead of parking yourself in a gap. Say, hey, go get penetration and play more aggressively, bull rush more aggressively. They didn't really seize that opportunity consistently enough. So those cutback lanes were always there. And if you want to know where the Vikings lost this game in the run game, and hey, they may not have lost it in run defense because, that last drive was kind of the only thing the Bears really put together, but there was a QB run on it. So it did have its part even in that drive where you wouldn't expect rushing to really matter at all. So what do you do? Again, it's probably moot because I don't think there's another team that does this kind of stuff on the Vikings schedule. I don't know what the Raiders have been doing with Aiden O'Connell. I haven't really paid attention to them at all, but I don't think Jake Browning's doing it. We know Jared Goff's not doing it. I don't think Jordan Love's doing it. So unless they run into something like this in the playoffs somehow, that's probably it. But in terms of what the Vikings can do differently about this, it's a lot of cat and mouse. And I don't know if it's smart to say, let's approach this differently next time. But they can shoot gaps a little bit more aggressively and even work that into pressure packages, pressure on the backside toward the running back where it's probably going to be the backside of the play and all this stuff's going on. And just have Josh Metellus time to snap and run up instead of having to fill from depth from, a 5 yard steep alignment. There's those kinds of nuanced solutions you could possibly have for this problem. But one of the more interesting factors of this that might really affect the future of the Vikings is that this kind of thing affects my evaluation of DJ Wanham as he enters free agency and whether or not the Vikings should bring him back. And if you can't squeeze down that space as the backside edge consistently in this division where we got Fields and if the Packers could start doing that with Love, and I don't think they'd be wrong to, that's a rough thing not to have. So it makes me that much more okay with letting him walk as much as I think he's improved this season. There's a take for you. Next Monday will be the next time that we talk. No postcast, of course, because there's no game. I'll be in Vegas. I'll be at the game. So the post-game stuff will be a little bit different. I'm sure we'll get through it together. All right. We'll talk more about some of this abstract stuff though, as the week goes on and eventually we transition to Raiders mode. I'll see you all next week for that. And as always, Skull.